Hello everybody, today we're going to be reacting to a video about should Catholics listen to heavy metal, and this is by Brian Holdsworth, a pretty popular channel right here on YouTube. And so this is going to be mostly geared towards Catholics in general, but I think I'm going to talk about like other denominations a little bit in the video as well. My opinion, I'm going to go ahead and say it on like dark content or like heavy metal. I don't particularly like heavy metal. Mostly that's just because it focuses on lyrics and stuff that are satanistic in my opinion, or point you towards going away from the gospel basically. But when it comes to like dark animes or something like that, I've already made videos on this in the past. But pretty much dark anime I don't view as actually pointing you away from Christ necessarily. And so I think that watching like dark anime or dark content that reflects our own world actually is still okay to watch. But heavy metal music, yeah, like if it's Christian heavy metal, yes, obviously it's perfectly fine. But if it's like satanistic heavy metal, I think yes, you should definitely steer away from it. So let's see what Brian Holdsworth actually has to say on this topic. And it's a pretty decently long video, so strap in, like and subscribe, and yeah, let's head on into this video.
So every now and then I
Oh
poke
yeah,
my head
I've seen
into,
some of these guys'
the
videos before, I
Catholicism
think.
subreddit, which if you're not familiar with, it's just like the big Catholic group on Reddit. And someone had posted a question there that caught my eye, which was, can Catholics listen to heavy metal? And the reason this caught my eye is because prior to becoming a Catholic, I was a big metal fan, a metalhead, if you will. I wasn't just a fan.
It's a pretty
I was
popular
a
genre of
practitioner.
music.
As a guitar player, this was a big reason I liked heavy metal. The songs were long, complicated, full of intricate guitar riffs that I enjoyed learning and playing, and which helped me to develop my skills a lot faster than if I was practicing on other genres. For me, it was an all-consuming identity.
See, right here, like already, like the imagery that they use in heavy metal, it's all very satanistic basically. You can see like that goat right here with the pentagram and all that kind of stuff, all sorts of demons and whatnot. It can be definitely very spiritually detrimental if you don't actually have your guard and have the armor of God, I guess you would say, put on in the face of all these evil things basically. Because there's a difference between like actually understanding evil rather than actually like giving into it or being indifferent to it, I guess you would say. So don't be indifferent to heavy metal. Basically, you should have the opinion of if it's satanistic, you should hate it, basically, is how I would view this topic pretty much.
Kind of like a religion. Like I was devoted to my favorite bands. I owned all their albums. I had posters.
That's
on
called
my walls, I had
idolatry,
stickers
basically.
on my
Like if you're
car.
devoted to
I
something that's
listened to
other
it
than God,
unceasingly,
then
kind
yeah,
of like how
basically
St. Paul
idolatry,
expects us to pray
how it can turn
in
into.
1 Thessalonians. But when I became a Christian, I suddenly felt these two identities fall into a kind of a tension. Because for as long as I've been a Christian, I've tried to be attentive to the effects of grace on my soul, because I'm someone who desperately needs it. I know the kind of person I was before a life of faith and prayer, and I know what kind of person I was going to become, and I know how dramatically that changed with the effects of grace. So
it does change, and one of the other things as well is that like you're not necessarily going to like experiencing heavy metal was a grace for this guy, and in from what I can observe, I guess, because that actually led him to be able to understand what right and wrong is, right? But if he never was into heavy metal or any of that kind of stuff, basically he doesn't have a frame of reference necessarily as to why he should follow the gospel beyond just that the gospel's good, which I think Christians like a lot of the times get in their little bubbles of like, oh, like the world's not that bad, there's nothing bad in the world really, it's all just great stuff. And so you can fall into lukewarmness in terms of like, okay, what sins am I okay with just ignoring basically in my own life and never repenting of them because I just think it's normal, and I don't fully accept just how black and white the gospel actually is on lots of subjects. Case in point with my own life as well, with anime. I used to have anime basically be kind of an idol in my life for a good while, I would say. Like, it was my obsession primarily, And then as soon as I actually started really taking my Catholicism seriously, and as soon as I actually started this channel as well, my primary goal with starting this channel was that anime isn't the problem, I'm the problem. I have to actually change how I'm thinking about things to be in line with the gospel. And yes, I've avoided certain shows in the past as well, just because they are, they don't really support a worldview that is really in line with Catholicism, as what I would say. But yes, like still the dark shows, that kind of stuff, I'm perfectly okay with watching those shows, because it's really just, if there's good moral lessons to be found in anime, you can take the good and reject the evil, basically, is what I would say. Cling to the good and, yeah, reject what is evil.
Anything that competes with that grace has always been, I'd say, pretty pronounced to my perception. And the music
obviously people have different struggles. Like some people just can't handle like
to pay close attention
dark
to.
type
All
stuff.
of which
I would
is
say.
To say, when someone asked about it on Reddit, I was interested to see if anyone shared my experience. And while I didn't read all the comments, the top ones that I did see all affirmed the same thing, which was that yes, heavy metal is perfectly compatible with your Catholic faith. Most of the replies were something like this.
Interesting.
Of course you can listen to heavy metal and be Catholic. I love heavy metal and I'm Catholic. Another one said something like, we really need to stop regulating people's entertainment. To which I immediately thought, you honestly think that society overly regulates people's entertainment? In an age when we completely...
It actually kind of does and kind of doesn't at the same time, because take anime, for example. The censorship kind of thing is going on a lot of the times right now. Basically, it's one of the main topics. I've not actually touched on this topic of censorship too much, except over on Twitter. I do actually have a Twitter, by the way. I think it's linked in somewhere. But basically, my stance on it is that censorship is bad for the primary purpose that it actually blocks people from experiencing reality without actually experiencing reality. So, for example, if entertainment is just a bubble of like, okay, like the world's just great, do whatever you want, and there's no consequences at all, which I think is what Satanism is as its core almost in terms of our modern society, is that you can just do whatever and there's no consequences to anything evil you do, basically. And because people don't know what evil's effects actually really are, or they think that it's a good thing because they've been influenced that way by media and that kind of stuff. So I think anime, in fact, dark anime especially, is very good at showing reality, consequences of reality, and not like glossing over things. Yes, I don't think that every show has to have like a bunch of sex scenes or like extreme violence in a lot of cases, but if it's necessary for the story, it should not be censored, really. And I think just having media that allows such things to be presented in a story is a good thing, just in general, and not having things be overly censored, or just not having good storytelling in general. Like Lord of the Rings, for example, has lots of graphic violence and that kind of stuff, and it's still a very, very good series. It's a very good movies, basically, even despite all of those kind of things that, like, if we lived in a very, 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 very strict Christian world, really, where who had a bunch of people who just rejected like all of that entirely and wouldn't let people even learn about why those things are, why violence or why gore and that kind of stuff. Like, obviously, you should be mature and whatnot. And I think people who are for censorship are not very mature in terms of their worldview. They're not very strong in their worldview necessarily, because they can't accept, like, it's a difficult subject to talk about, really, but really it's like you have to form your conscience in a way that's in line with the gospel. And yeah, like, the gospel is not all just sunshine and rainbows, basically. Like, love your neighbor and that's it. It's about, like, denial of self. It's about self-sacrifice. It's about the blood and gore of the cross. It really is about the darkness of this world and the principle that even through the valley of death, basically, Christ redeems everything, and he's got a plan for everything as well.
Embrace cultural relativism, and most
I'm going on lots of rants today.
Little screens under their pillows that give them unlimited access to every possible curiosity.
Yeah, see, iPad kids now. There's just...
I think we could use
you
a
can get
lot
to it so easily,
more
get sucked
regulating
into it
what
very
people
easily.
find
Thankfully,
appealing
I've
in
gotten out of that
entertainment. And the
shit.
same is kind of true of the church.
Sorry
we live in
for
this
the
age
S
in
word,
which
but
every worldly flavor is coming at us from every angle, trying to capture our interest, and nobody's talking about the potential risks of what we listen to and watch in our media and music, which we spend a lot of time doing. But the ancient philosophers and the church fathers talked about this quite a bit at a time in which our
Interesting.
exposure was quite a bit more limited than it is now. Now, because this is such a neglected question of our age, I think it's really important that we look to great thinkers of the past who did address it. C.S. Lewis argued that all things being equal, if you have to choose between reading old books or new books, you should choose the old books, because new books are trapped in the prejudices of our own age, prejudices that you probably already share as a child of that age. Old books can correct a lot of the modern errors. We don't even notice our errors because
old knowledge. That's why Catholicism is so relevant and sticking around, basically, and becoming trendy again, because literally it's old knowledge that completely refutes all of the modern knowledge that we got with like transgenderism and let's see, all sorts of other subjects as well.
we've simply absorbed them through something like osmosis because they're so ubiquitous in our times. He said thinkers of the past, they're not infallible. They'll make mistakes, but they won't make the mistakes that are common today, which is it's like a breath of fresh intellectual air and perspective you wouldn't otherwise be exposed to. It's a helpful correction to a lot of what we take for granted today. So because there's such a deafening silence on this topic today, which seems to have convinced all the Catholic Redditors that this is the same as like a carte blanche permission, and since great thinkers of the Western tradition of the past did spend
if you hear it on Reddit, that automatically means it's true. And it automatically means that it's okay, right? Because you heard someone on Reddit say, oh, listening to you, like, literally, Satanistic heavy metal is going to be perfectly okay, right? Because anything goes, right? As long as you have your faith and whatnot. That's not quite how it goes. Metal is not inherently evil. Hey, this comment actually knows what's up. If you're open to discussion and put back on these ideas, I have a ton of them. Metal is not inherently evil. Sincerely, Catholic metalhead. Yes. Metal is not inherently evil. It's mainly the topics and the people behind like the lyrics. And yeah, it depends. It definitely depends pretty much.
Address questions of
depends on the song, depends on the band,
music,
depends on the intent.
Stands to reason we should consult those past thinkers. And in the church's intellectual tradition, there are two currents we can look to, which are faith and reason. Faith tells us about the content of revelation, or the things that we could only know because God told us about it. He revealed it to us. That's where we get the word revelation, which this question doesn't fall into. So that means we can look to the tradition of reason. And in the church, that tradition has been extremely inclusive of two major pre-Christian philosophers, which are Plato and Aristotle.
Yes,
and
two of the greatest
they have a lot to say on this topic. Plato especially talks about the effects music has on the soul, and especially on young people. As he proposes his ideal city-state in the Republic, he says that poets who fixate on dirges and lamentations, or in other words, excessively depressing or negative material, that they should be censored for the ill effects that they'll have on people. And he also points out something that's really obvious, but for some reason
still,
we
sorrow
are
is something that
entirely
should be
blind to, which is that certain
understood.
modes of music, certain styles communicate the same negative sentiments, whether they have lyrical content or not. And for the same reason that we should avoid excessively negative poetry, he says we should also avoid excessively negative sounding music. Now, Plato's Republic is a bit bonkers in terms of its actual legislative proposals, but it does make incredibly profound philosophical points. And in this case, Plato's concern about music is that it affects the soul and it arouses our passions for good or for bad. Good forms of music have good effects and bad forms have bad effects. This is a foundational premise that was adopted by all the saints, fathers, and the doctors that go on to address this subject. And it
so case in point, I think when Billie Eilish music started becoming very popular, a lot of the lyrics and stuff are very depressing kind of lyrics, right? They're kind of like nihilistic. They're kind of nihilistic a lot from what I've heard at the time, basically. And yes, like, my sister was like interested in her music as well for a while until like we were told, oh, you should not listen to that music by our parents. So we did not listen to that music anymore, basically, after that point. But like literally see, that's an example of what I would say. It's overly secular music or overly Satanistic music. You can have there's a difference between secular and Satanistic music, in my opinion. Like heavy metal, if you had just a metal song that like has no, is basically just a worldly song about just like, oh, like, well, I guess I'll use Pink Floyd in this example. I don't view Pink Floyd as Satanistic at all. I view it as secular more so. Pink Floyd has a lot of lyrics that are very like not in line with the gospel, I would say, necessarily. They're more in line with just the tragedy of our world, basically, which I think is a fine way to experience like the tragedy of the world as well. And I wouldn't view Pink Floyd music as depressing necessarily. I personally like it, but I don't view it as Satanistic either, because it's not directly referencing Satanism. It's not encouraging you to like basically stray away from God, I would say. It's actually pointing you towards God in the secular sense of it's secular music. So if you have a biblical worldview and you're experiencing the world, you're going to come out with conclusions that are in line with the gospel, basically. That's my 2 cents on different types of music. But yeah, sad and depressing music, if that's all you've ever listened to. If you listen to only emo music and that kind of stuff, you're going to be emo. Yes, like some emo music is pretty good as well, just because it's got like just one of the human emotions basically in it, and so it is art in terms of that. It reflects humans basically. So
really should not be that controversial. Obviously there are good forms and bad forms of music. I think most people can admit that if they're being honest, but then those same people, even if they're Christian, will refuse to actually admit that specific examples resemble the bad form. Aristotle,
exactly.
as with many
That's
things,
that's why one of my opinions on the band Ghost, I hate the band Ghost primarily because they are Satanists and they have Satanistic music. Sure, they have a great skill and they're glorifying God in terms of playing the music with great skill, but the core message of it is bad, and they're trying to lure people in with catchy riffs and that kind of stuff to basically get them to commit sacrilege in their own heart and blasphemy and that kind of stuff. Very bad.
He takes a slightly more moderate view than Plato. He says that
there's a lot of
music
stuff to talk
appeals
about with
our
this subject.
Enthusiasm. It gets us excited to want to participate in whatever it is that is arousing our interests. And that enthusiasm is an emotion of the ethical part of the soul. It's what we adhere to. It's what we endorse voluntarily. He goes on to say that music moves our emotions to sympathy for whatever it is that they portray, which is to say that we are swayed, we are moved, we are affected in our state of mind and emotion by the music we choose to expose ourselves to. It's emotion,
not necessarily
again,
logic,
this is so
I would
obvious
say.
it should hardly need to be said. He then explains that music is pleasing, and that virtue consists in rejoicing in what is good and hating what is bad, so that it's a noble thing to aim to be someone who makes right judgments about good and evil. And
yes, exactly. You make right judgments about what is good and evil. Now, in the subject of like dark content or dark kind of things, right? Obviously, you're going to hate a show, like the person in a show that does commit the evil acts, basically. That's kind of how shows go, but would you hate the show itself for showing the evil acts? That's the real question that I am posing, and my philosophy is that you shouldn't hate the show for being a dark show, right? So, like, case in point, like shows like Demon Slayer and whatnot, they're very gory and they're very dark and that kind of stuff. So does that make the show itself bad? I don't think it does. And does that make you bad if you enjoy that the show is dark? I don't think so either. Because, really, if it's adding to the storytelling, it's a very good thing. However, that's one of the main things that like I learned from just like, you know, the whole the P industry and like what most people actually, what stuff is actually popular on there versus what's actually good, basically. Because the female body inherently is good. It's it's like God's crowning creation, basically, and so inherently it is good. But the most stuff that's popular on that area is stuff that completely is like over the top. It's like basically taking you away from observing like the human body basically in a way that is like in line with what is good and true, and it's corrupting it basically, which inherently is evil. And somehow that stuff is way more popular than just inherently stuff that is like inherently beautiful, I guess you would say. Now, we all have our own issues and our own struggles basically, but one of the things I've been extremely grateful for with is that like I have been given that sight for beauty, I guess you would say, rather than the sight for evil, I guess you would say. Because I can... It's a very difficult subject to talk about. I might talk about it at some point when things... well, I'll probably do like a testimony video at some point, most likely.
Have our passions or your emotions governed by those same judgments according to our reason. Therefore, music that portrays
the main
what
point is
noble
you should desire
and
good
virtuous
is the main
maintains that alignment. It encourages it. It reinforces it. Music that stirs up our passions out of alignment with what we judge to be good and beautiful is therefore contrary to virtue. And these themes all get picked up by the church fathers with one addition, which is that they are extremely cautious, if not overtly hostile, to secular forms of music. Fathers like Clement, Saint Clement of Alexandria, Saint John Chrysostom, Saint Augustine, Saint Basil the Great, they all touched on the differences between good and bad music. They said that the good should be modest, ordered, especially, and that it should strengthen virtue and elevate
so
the
like
mind
maybe
to
they would
God
consider
and
Mozart bad music because it's kind of like
sensual,
differently theatrical and that kind of stuff, right?
Passions like lust
maybe.
Or frivolity or rage, or makes mere pleasure its end, those should be rejected. And then St. Thomas Aquinas, the universal doctor of the church, he picks up all of these themes. He says that music is not morally neutral.
Aquinas.
It works on the passions of the soul, imitating those passions, echoing what Aristotle says. He says the good kind disposes the soul to piety, to contemplation, and to virtue, and the bad kind seeks pleasure as its end, at best, and at worst, it stirs up our passions to a disordered pitch, out of alignment with virtue and reason. So,
see, that goes into my argument of, I guess, other things as well, because like the main reason I listen to music is because it is like good music inherently, like it's good art basically. The reason I don't listen to like modern pop music or like Taylor Swift, for example, is because that's just inherently bad music. It's just inherently bad. And a lot of people, it's like they don't understand that like Mozart was excellent music, basically. The classic pianists are excellent. Art form glorifying God just by the fact that it is like not contrary to his will. It's not contrary to his mission in the world. And it is just a glorification of humanity in itself and what humans can actually create. Same thing I would say about like modern type stuff as well, like VTubing as well. Like, so we live in a world where the internet is prevalent as well, but there's so many different VTubers and that kind of stuff, right? Would you consider that bad? I don't necessarily think so, because it's not contrary to the gospel necessarily. Sure, you got your VTubers with their super like jiggly boobas and whatnot. Sure, you got them. They can jiggle their bobas and whatnot and get lots of viewers and that kind of stuff. And yes, that is bad in terms of it inciting people to potentially be lustful, I guess you would say. However, it goes back to my argument that the female body actually is beautiful, basically. And so, basically, if you are able to appreciate what is actually truly good about it, rather than just having, like, I guess, desire for, like, bad sexual acts, basically, is what I would say, you're going to be more or less okay in the world, I would say, in terms of how your own conscience is able to think about things. That's my opinion, anyway.
So how does this all apply and compare to heavy metal?
But yes, if we had less of jiggly physics, I don't think it's a bad thing.
The closest thing might have been like songs designed to arouse the fighting spirit in soldiers heading off to battle.
Yeah, marches.
Which both Aristotle and Thomas, if I remember correctly, said was a good thing in its proper context.
Yes,
so
indeed.
because there's no version of metal in the day, we have to try to apply their principles to the question. And in evaluating any music, Plato said that we have to look at three things, which are the melody, the rhythm, and the lyrics. And all three of those stood out to me when I started asking the question if this was fitting to listen to as a Christian. But the lyrics were especially
the lyrics, I think, is the primary
notable.
thing.
Because if we're being honest here, like the majority of metal lyrics are completely incompatible with virtue, contemplation, and Christian piety. A lot of the bands I listen to, like Opeth, In Flames, Iron Maiden, they fixated a lot of attention on demonic themes, if not outright fascination or glorification of the devil.
Exactly.
And if it wasn't that,
and that's why
they were talking
it's pretty
about
bad.
violence, morbid curiosities, vulgar ideas, rebellion, or just what Plato called dirges and lamentations. In fact, actually, Opeth has a song called The Dirge of November and an album called Lamentations. And the reason those kinds of themes were and are so ubiquitous in metal is because they fit the style. The sound of metal is angry and dark. Just look at the bands who are credited for first establishing that sound. Ozzy Osbourne. He used to say that they were just spellbound by chord progressions and modes that sounded like what he called doom music. And yes, not all metal songs have a dark or demonic content, but I think that would be an exception. So to try to cite, like Christian metal bands or the odd song that breaks the mold, it's not a good way to draw general principles or to try to define something like metal. Trying to make rules out of the unusual or the exceptional is called the converse accident fallacy. It's like notice.
Yeah, it's like the same thing with anime as well. Like when you say anime is like bad or anime is like this kind of stuff or that, there's so many different anime shows that like there's so many different genres and whatnot that they're all not the same. Like each show is different. But when I say like dark animes, I'm usually talking about basically Berserk is what I'm talking about. Like I think Berserk is a great story. I think like Fate is a good story as well, even though they're both very dark. Obviously there are some examples of like dark animes or animes that just are not really good, I guess you would say. But it's on an individual basis. You can't generalize as much with everything.
Noticing a blind person using a seeing eye dog and then concluding that every dog uses their dog for navigation. Exceptions are exceptions for a reason. Wow. And the reality is that the broad defining themes of heavy metal are often in stark and even explicit opposition to Christianity. It might be true that not all metal bands are satanic, but it is a pretty accurate statement to say that most satanic bands
I would view the Sound of Silence song that
and it's not by accident.
What's his name
so
did?
that's the lyrical
the
content,
cover of it. I view that
song
is perfectly fine to listen to as an exception, side, basically.
Again, if we're being honest,
even though it could be considered heavy metal,
to stir up extreme emotions, and they're clearly negative emotions, either anger.
See, it's not even like righteous anger.
Now,
it's like
St. Thomas
it's like rebellious anger that is being stirred up, basically.
Virtue consists in doing the right thing at the right time. And there are some times when anger is the absolute most appropriate response, like in the face of serious injustice. But
good point,
to just start streaming your favorite metal song when you're in the car or at home is to needlessly stir up negative emotions.
Or you become very desensitized to
is
things
calling
as well
for
sometimes.
Like when I was younger with my friends and we would go on snowboarding trips to the mountains, on the last leg of the drive up the mountain to the parking lot, we'd always throw in Metallica's Master of Puppets because we wanted to get, quote, pumped up. But what it really meant was we wanted intense feelings to encourage us to do what we perceive to be an intense
basically
activity,
a march.
Which really admits the effects that music can have on your state of mind, if not your soul. But the problem is we were mistaking intense rage and negativity for just intensity in general because we were so desensitized to the modern experience of sensory overload that the only way we could feel something intensely.
This is a good topic. This is a really, really good topic because sensory overload. A lot of music does have sensory overload. However, it depends on what kind of mood you're into as well. Because music can change your mood, but also music reflects your mood as well. Therefore, I would say, there's art in music that is overly complex and that kind of stuff. Like Mozart, for example, he had very complex music for the day that he was making music for compared to other classical artists and that kind of stuff at the time. And you would argue that, oh, that's way too much. You should tone it down and make it a little bit more like chill and like normal and that kind of stuff, right? However, like that's part of the greatness of his art, is that it was like over the top, I guess you would say. And same thing can be said for atmospheric music as well. There's this one band in particular, Ring Tosugure Sigure. It's a Japanese band, and they have both very, very complex tracks and also very, very like ambient kind of tracks, I guess you would say, as well. Basically, there's such a wide variety in music that there's just so much combinations you can have with it. So yeah, there's exceptions to everything.
If it were on the extreme end of the spectrum. So when I first became a Christian,
but obviously
I
sometimes a bunch of noise is not what you want to hear, or like you can't actually
metal
like
I was so attached
appreciate
to
the art
was
of it.
completely incompatible with the newly adopted faith. So for my first Lent, I threw away all my CDs. I took down all the posters.
That's a good idea.
And I just gave it up. And the
It's a very good idea.
weren't at all subtle.
Silence is a
and
good
even today, I'll
silence
sometimes
is
return
good
to it
as well.
for various reasons, often nostalgia. And
But
if I'm paying
sometimes I would
attention-
also say that, like, when we talk about silence, we're not talking about silence necessarily in terms of us thinking about nothing. We're talking about silence in terms of our orientation towards God, basically. So you can be silent with background music on, right? You can be in silence, in a state of silence and prayer with background music on. You can even be in a state of silence and prayer by listening to, like, I don't know as an example necessarily, but you could be in a state of silence listening to something that's like just very complex music. Like you could be listening to Mozart and be in a state of prayer and basically grace, I guess you would say at that point. And yeah, just appreciation. Sorry for that. But yeah, it really depends on your own mental state and how you actually enter into the state of silence rather than there just being no sound. Because sometimes sounds actually they ground you to reality instead of you living in a lie of like fiction and my mind's always somewhere else. Like art should ground you to reality. It should ground you to either reality or fiction for a specific purpose. And as long as that purpose is actually pointing towards God or pointing towards your own reverence and prayer, then I think that those are the best type of art to actually pursue.
It usually has negative effects on me, especially as a husband and father, because I have 8 kids, a busy work schedule, which
that's a lot of stuff going on.
Demands a lot of me. So if anything,
you like peaceful
or
music,
my state of mind gets thrown out of calibration, I notice
that
that
would
because I
make him
start to struggle to
grounded more,
manage all of these responsibilities. I become irritable and impatient. I even start to stray into certain vices that I thought I had a clear handle on. And even though it sounds like I'm
Billie Eilish.
Here, I would say that this is true. These criticisms are true of all top 40 music. Everything our culture upholds and celebrates is the kind of stuff
it's pushed with all the money they have. They can just
pagan
push it and get people to ignore the traditional music and that
virtue.
Stuff.
And if I can be so bold to suggest, they would also be just horrified to see us incorporating these genres of music into our worship of God. So if you aren't convinced by everything I've said, let me offer you a challenge in closing to take just like a 1-week fast from any kind of music that stirs up your passions the way the great thinkers of old describe. Try listening to someone like Paul Jernberg, who can be found on Spotify and YouTube, and who has written some of the most beautiful modern compositions, including the intro and outro music on my videos.
Yes.
And if you don't find yourself...
It's very good music. However, I will also say that, like, a lot of the times, the reason why I don't listen to too many Christian artists is because they don't necessarily, like, some of them are good musicians and that kind of stuff, but they're sometimes just a bit too normal. They're not normal necessarily, but they're just a bit too, like, not skillful, I would say. To be as polite as possible, I would just say that music sometimes is not it. It's just sometimes not it. Like, the lyrics and stuff, sure, they can be very good. Sometimes even the lyrics are just very basic. Singing cadence and that kind of stuff is also a part of it. Like, we're not all meant to sing a certain way and just be all conformed to certain types of singing as well. Like Gregorian chant and whatnot, That's a specific genre, basically, but you can also have, like, different types of singing, like opera, for example. Opera is fundamentally different from Gregorian chant, but it is also adjacent in a way that does glorify God, just in the art of the human voice, basically, I guess you would say. But it would not fit into a Gregorian chant kind of scenario, I guess you would say. Even though you could interchange them, I guess you would say. You could write an opera that is focused on uplifting the soul, I guess, towards the Lord, I'd say. And that's why a lot of music I listen to is along those lines.
More able to pray and to dwell in silence, less restless, less irascible. Then maybe there's something to what I'm talking about. That's definitely the experience I've had, and it continues to be confirmed every time I let myself go back to listening that kind of music. Okay, thanks for watching that. I hope that...
Pretty good video, pretty good video. Yeah, so... Basically, church bells are a form of heavy metal. Indeed they are, indeed they are. That is very true that they are. So yeah, basically he didn't go towards the topic of like yes or no you should, but he basically went to the topic of you should discern yourself, which I think is a very good thing to say. Very, very good channel. He definitely seems very grounded in his Catholic faith as well. And yeah, I hope my my discussion as well kind of led to some interesting thought topics for you all to experience as well today. But yeah, we're going to end this out, I guess, in probably Glory Be, because that's at the end of the day, that's what we want to do. We want to glorify God basically through everything that we do, no matter what it is. So glory be to the Father, to the Son, to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Peace be with you all, and I hope you have an excellent week.